I'll never forget the night of August 14th, 2021. I was fishing the river with my friend in a suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota. We loved coming to this public park to fish because it was quiet and there was a nice sandbar to fish from. This park had a Sioux burial mound about a half-mile from our spot. After fishing for a better part of the day, we decided to leave at dusk. In order to get back to our vehicles, we had to take a trail through the woods, which was about a 5-minute walk. I put a clip-on light on the bill of my hat so we could see the trail. I remember when I first glanced ahead down the trail, I saw 2 circular white lights that I assumed were fireflies. Once we got further down the trail, we were closer to the area I'd seen them. It was then that I saw a pair of eyes that were either highly reflective from my light or actually glowing white. It wasn't long before I could make out a body. It was a very large, white body on 4 legs, bigger than a wolf but unnaturally skinny. I couldn't make out any facial features because its eyes were so bright. I wanted to warn my friend, but all I could manage to say was, "There's something there." We had no choice but to proceed because this was the only way back to our vehicles. This thing just stared us down and didn't make a sound. My friend yelled at it to try and scare it away, but it didn't react at all. I yelled at it after she did, and it responded back by mimicking my voice. I honestly questioned myself and thought I was imagining things. So I yelled at it again, and it responded back at the same volume, same pitch, exactly like my voice. We both continued on this path in silence, but I maintained eye contact with the creature. I felt like this thing was ready to attack us at any moment, but it just stood there staring. Eventually, we were out of the woods and could no longer see it. We ran back to our vehicles, and I felt a sense of relief. I asked my friend, "Did you hear it talk back to me?" She said she did, and she said it sounded just like my voice when it responded back to us. If she hadn't heard the voice, I would have assumed I imagined it. We went over what happened, and our stories were the same. After our experience, my friend went to see a shaman. The shaman believed it was an evil spirit and performed a cleansing on her. At the advice of one of my friends, I burned some tobacco and said a prayer asking that the entity would leave me alone. It took me several months to just feel normal again, but I still think about it on a weekly basis. I tried to do further research and contacted the management of the park. They said the park we went to had ancient Indian remains scattered along the river that were unmarked. And they said there were more Indian remains in that park than any other parks they managed. I contacted several Native American friends and was told the entity we encountered was a skinwalker. I know skinwalkers are part of Navajo culture, but from what I read, it checks many more of the boxes than any other supernatural being or cryptid. Thanks for listening. If anyone has any insight on what this was, it would be greatly appreciated. This happened a few weeks ago while me and my dad were out fishing at around 7:30 at night. It was pretty dark, but we were having fun and having a pretty successful night. Neither of us noticed at the time, but there was a small dinghy floating on the lake. It was getting pretty foggy, so we started packing up our stuff, when suddenly there was a lot of splashing coming from the lake, almost like someone was drowning. Only then is when we noticed the dinghy, because the splashing was practically right next to it. Then, the scariest thing happened. Hands started to come out of the water and grab the dinghy, rocking it back and forth like they were trying to get someone to fall out of it. At this point, me and my dad noped the fuck out and ran off toward our car. and got the fuck out of there. We haven't been back since. When I was 10, I was at a lake, way out in the woods on some land that my dad owned. I was alone, aside from my dog. I had only been fishing on the little pier in the southeast corner for about 10 minutes when I noticed someone or something watching me from the tree line on the other side of the lake. I was only 10, but I kept my composure. For some reason, I felt it important that whatever or whoever it was didn't know that I was aware. Anyway, it started moving slowly from tree to tree, never taking its eyes off me. The lake was about 75 yards wide, so I couldn't see any details, but I could tell which way the figure was facing. I realized that it was stalking me, and I nonchalantly put my pole down and walked down the pier and up the bank toward the trail back to our cabin. Once I hit the tree line, I hauled ass to the cabin and waited there with one of my dad's guns until my parents got home. The only witness I had was my dog, and he saw it as well. I know because he was staring intently at the figure while giving a low growl until I quietly told him to stop. I have no idea who or what it could have been, but I know its intentions were most definitely not good. This took place in southwest Mississippi, near the Alabama border, back in the early 90s. We didn't live there. Our home was in Mobile, Alabama, but we spent most weekends up there. I know it could have been a person, but the nearest neighbor was a very old couple that lived a few miles away. The closest paved road was a good 15 to 20 minute drive away from our lands. Aside from the lake and the open area our cabin was on, the surrounding area was all really thick forest. The figure was extremely tall. I have an extremely good memory, especially for details. Also, shortly before I actually noticed it, I got a very strong "I'm being watched by something dangerous" feeling. I never felt safe there again, and I was glad when my dad sold it and got a place near Gulf Shores. I wish I could have seen more details. Or maybe not. At the time of this story, I was a freshman in college. I'm also a very introverted person and have only made a few friends throughout my time in college, maybe 3 or 4. Also, at the time, I had a bit of a fishing phase where I loved fishing. I still do, but at the time, I loved to almost every day. I only really fished the common freshwater fish, bass, sunnies, a few catfish, etc. But I was looking to go for something bigger. I was hoping to catch some carp. My college campus does have a lake and does stock it for students to fish. My school isn't near a gas station or shopping center or anything of the sort, so I couldn't just go walk to get fishing supplies, and I didn't have a car, so I was really only dependent on what I brought from home. Carp are also very sloppy fish, so they will just eat straight up food. Anything that can produce a pungent odor, I would just get some food from the dining hall, and whatever I didn't finish, I would fish with. Carp also prefer wet, sticky, rainy, or overcast weather, and are more active during the darker parts of the day. So, one day, I sat in my room bored until around 6:30 or 7, and I started to hear rain outside. I didn't immediately go straight to fishing. I went to the dining hall at dinner and came back with leftovers to retrieve my rain jacket, boots, and fishing gear. I was taking my time, so by the time I arrived at the lake, it was about 8. Now, this lake is a pretty modest size. You could see probably 90% of it, regardless of where you stand. 3/4 of it is bare grass, with a walking path, while the remaining bit is trees and other brush. I stood on a bank and threw my line in the water. I leaned against a tree, but I couldn't look at my phone because it was raining. So my attention was focused on my line until something else caught it. I spotted this person, or at least what I assumed to be a person, right on the outer edge of where the trees and brush began. It was a rainy night, and the streetlights didn't stretch to where they were, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But they seemed to be wearing white pants, a big black sweatshirt, and no shoes, just what appeared to be socks. They were standing in a very marshy, swampy area as well. If they weren't already getting completely soaked from the rain, they'd be getting soaked from the feet up with mud. They also had what seemed to be a small black box with white light coming out of it. The light seemed to pierce through the night. It was insanely bright, even though it was very small. I'd say palm-sized. The amount of power it had was incredible. They would walk back and forth from the edge of the lake, look at the lake, and skip or dance back behind a tree, all the while picking up this small cube and pointing the light in the direction of different areas, going back behind the tree, revealing at the lake's edge, skip back behind, reveal themselves to move the box, go back behind the tree, and then do it all over again. I watched them do this multiple times. At this point, I was more interested in them than my fishing. It wasn't until they went back behind a tree, this time walking slowly, then stayed behind it for an uncomfortable amount of time, and walked out slowly to the lake's edge, and like they had a sixth sense, just turned and looked directly at me. From the only light emanating on them, I could only see this metallic, shiny, silvery sheath covering their face. It was featureless, with no holes cut out for eyes or mouth. They stood there, like they were staring into my soul for about 30 seconds. I didn't look away. I don't even think I blinked. Then they turned, and I saw them walk into the brush, leaving the small cube on the ground. At this point, I had had enough. I packed up everything quickly, and as I was walking back toward my dorm, I heard manic footsteps, very much barefoot slaps on the tarmac path. I took off running back to the staircase leading back to the main campus, but not without looking down the foot trail. I took my final look at the figure, and they were sprinting in the opposite direction with their arms up in the air, not making any noise. I got back to my dorm safe and sound. Nothing happened for the rest of the night, but I returned to the lake early the next morning before my classes and found what appeared to be hoof prints, though very exaggerated points on the top, and the shape of a bloated V. Normally, I would say this might have been some drunk or high student, but that doesn't explain their extremely weird behavior. Those weird footprints in the drying mud, or that shiny face that pierced my soul. I'm not sure what I meant that night, but I'm not sure I even want to know.